answers. Next question, do you, I'm pausing because I'm told we're having streaming issues. And we seem to be having some issues with being on Facebook and maybe are only on YouTube. Next question, do you still believe, quote, but there is not a crime crisis in Washington, D.C., unquote? At what point do you think crime is a crisis in this city? Please do include your position on the homicide rate and what you think should be done to tackle the situation. All right, I've answered this question before, but I'll answer it as many times as it is asked. When I said there's not a crime crisis, I was responding in testimony to the House Oversight Committee, where Republicans were claiming that they needed to intervene in the district because there's a crime crisis. And if crime crisis is an excuse to intervene in the district, then I'm going to say, no, thank you. We don't want congressional interference. I actually was asked this question earlier today. Congress has shown repeatedly that they really aren't better at running the government, the district government. They're having difficulty, as you may know, running their own government. We are struggling with a whole lot of illegal cannabis establishments because Congress has intervened and prohibited us from regulating the legal possession of marijuana. And Congress has not been helpful in terms of more resources to the U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute. The U.S. Attorney's Office, as you may know, has been dealing with, I think it's close to 1,000 prosecutions related to the January 6, 2021 demonstrations. And so they have significantly less resources to deal with local crime. That is a problem. Congress is not helping. In fact, the House Republicans cut MPD's request by $20 million for reimbursement for details, federal details by MPD. So no, thank you. I'm not interested in Congress intervening. I didn't even mention statehood or home rule. So it was in that context that I said there's not a crime crisis. I recognize that people are very concerned, and it's seems to be the number one concern with most Washingtonians, what's happening with crime. And I've had numerous discussions with the chief of police and others in our justice system about what we can be doing differently. I have said several times, I've said many times that a couple of things that we could do that would have an immediate effect. Improvement would be to focus on more resources, identifying and putting more resources in MPD to close more cases more quickly. When less than half of the homicides are closed within 12 months of being committed, that is not a deterrent. There is not a deterrent effect. The closure rate for robberies is significantly less. The other strategy that would have an immediate improvement would be more aggressive prosecutions. And looking at why courts are not holding folks pretrial, looking at what's going on there and understanding if there's ways that we can make changes there as well. I'm asked to include in my answer my position on the homicide rate. Even when homicides were low, and around 2012, 2013, we had only 88 homicides in the district. If you calculated that as a rate relative to our population, it was higher than New York City. And I've always felt that more could be done. I have argued with our criminal justice partners that there needs to be a much more focused strategy on focusing on violent crimes involving guns in particular. If we could reduce or eliminate, I'll say reduce, the incidence of guns in violent crimes, that would significantly reduce lethality in our city. So I'm happy to come back to questions on crime. Let me go on with the questions I got in advance. The next question is, how does not having a House Speaker impact DC laws? The answer is it's not clear. We are in the process of sending a bill to the Congress. I thought it was going to be sent today. It looks like it'll be sent tomorrow. And that will be our first test of whether not having a permanent House Speaker impacts our ability to deliver laws. Our laws go to Congress for a 30-day congressional review unless it amends the criminal code, in which case it's a 60-day congressional review. Earlier this year, we realized that the way the Senate counts those days is different than the way we count the days. The Home Rule Act says the count begins on the date that the House and the Senate received the legislation. We learned that the Senate parliamentarian had interpreted it as the date when the Senate publishes it in the congressional record. We don't believe there's any basis for that in the law, that interpretation is invalid. We did have a problem earlier this year when there was no speaker, that there was no one to deliver our bills to in the House. But there is a speaker today, an interim speaker. And so we're testing it with the delivery of a bill tomorrow to see if the Speaker's office will accept it. If it doesn't, then it means that we are unable to deliver our laws and our bills that have been enacted to undergo the congressional review. The next question, have you released a statement on the situation in Israel? I urge the council to vote on a resolution condemning Hamas, even if some members of the council won't vote for it. So a couple of things. I suspect that the council will be unanimous if there was a sense of the council resolution. I have not released a statement at this point, but I have been clear in my belief that what's happening in the Middle East is wrong and that there should not have been the attack on Israel that occurred. I don't agree with the questioner that it would be okay to vote on a resolution even if some members of the council won't vote for it, because I think we always want to show a united front on matters like this. Next question, who on the DC Council thought it was a good idea to require DC small businesses to use cash in the middle of a 20-year crime surge? You are putting employees in danger by requiring them to handle cash. Why is this law important for DC residents? Won't it hamper businesses? So it's an interesting point. This isn't the first I've heard it, but it's not the first time I've heard it in the last week or two, but it is the first time I have heard that businesses are better off if they if they refuse cash and only allow credit cards. The challenge with credit cards is that there are maybe as many as 30% of our population who are underbanked or unbanked, and that means they don't have credit cards. And so if we care about equity, then we have to require that cash is used. When the council held a hearing, and it actually was my committee several years ago, there was no testimony that using cash in a business, which I believe has been the case for about 300 years in this country, that actually was contributing to crime. And in fact, what we're seeing really in the news these days are these shoplifting, some of which appears to be organized, but not seeing that there's an issue with cash. In any event, most people use credit cards these days, so it's not like there would be a whole lot of cash in the business. So it's a connection that I've heard in the last couple of weeks since it was in the news about the new law, which was adopted actually a couple of years ago, but it's just now gone into effect, that says that all businesses have to accept cash. It's a new argument that has not been raised at any time in the past. with regard to cash. But to allow businesses to refuse cash is to exclude members of our population. So I guess to just finish this one, I don't believe we're putting employees in danger. And I've explained why it's important. It's a matter of equity. And we had a hearing on this. No businesses came forward and said it would hamper businesses. Next question. Recently, Prince George's County voted to return to allow members to attend meetings and vote online. The DC Council also has members of the council participate virtually. What are the pros and cons of lawmakers doing their jobs virtually? It's a better way of doing business to do it in person. There are informal conversations. There's a better mix of conversations during a meeting or right before a meeting. In person, the opportunity for interactions in person is far superior than the more, how do I want to put this, restrictive environment of Zoom. For instance, none of you can interrupt me right now, and I cannot see anybody's reaction. So if I'm saying something that just really doesn't make sense, I'm unaware. And it could be that somebody wants to follow up with a question because I'm sort of missing it, and but you can't do that easily. This is just a much more rigid interaction than in person. And I would say that the legislative process is one that thrives on informal interaction. So I bump into a colleague and it suddenly occurs to me that I wanted to ask them about something. This is completely spontaneous. I'm able to bring it up and it'll be done in 30 seconds or 2 minutes, which is about the time it's taking us to log in here today and to deal with, I think, we're still having a problem with Facebook, Lindsay?
Yeah, Facebook is off. We're just on YouTube.
Yeah, we're only on YouTube. So those would be the pros and cons. I'm a strong believer in person. In fact, I was meeting with somebody earlier this afternoon who said that many businesses are now back full time. But at the same time, we do allow council members to participate virtually. Councilmember Gray is still dealing with his recovery, and his being able to participate virtually has enabled him to participate. The last question I have that I got before the this meetup was, unhoused people were removed from Farragut Park with no warning by DDOT. Why is Martha's Table not allowed to serve people there? And why was Unity Healthcare not allowed to provide medical care there? Well, to be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know why DDOT would have removed unhoused from Farragut Park, since Farragut Square is federal and National Park Service and is not controlled by DDOT. So either DDOT did that for reasons I don't understand, or the questioner has a misimpression of what happened. Similarly, I don't know, I'm unaware of any policy or decision that says that Martha's Table is not allowed to serve people there. I believe Martha's Table has a van and pulls up in the street. And so the Park Service, I don't believe, would have any authority to say that they could not serve people from their van in the street or on the sidewalk. And I can't speak to why Unity Healthcare was not allowed to provide medical care. Medical care should always be allowed. Lindsay, I'm out of questions.
Okay, we had quite a few, some from Facebook before it shut down, and then a couple we got the email and one YouTube chat. So, all right, I'll start with Councilmember Parker has introduced a number of bills on child tax credit in the council scheduled hearings on these bills. And I see that they have been referred to CWED and facilities and family services. You get that?
Yes. So interesting that the questioner would question this. I spoke with Zachary Parker just this morning about it. And he's looking for a hearing after the Tax Revision Commission submits its recommendations, which I expect will be at the end of the year. The bill's not in the committee of the whole, and so if I'm understanding correctly, and so the scheduling of a hearing would be by the appropriate committee chair.
What is the process for redrawing police district boundaries? Is it purely legislative, executive, or some combination of the two? And you should speak up because they can't hear you.
The question is, what's the process for redrawing police boundaries? The process is one where MPD does the drawing. I believe it has to be submitted to the council for approval. I don't know if that's passive approval or active. This happened a few years ago, and there were some adjustments made. It came from MPD. I don't know if the council could initiate a change. I would be very hesitant for the council to do this because the police boundaries, that is the districts, there's 7 police districts, and they don't line up with wards, and that's a good thing because the police boundaries are not political. Police districts are not political districts. And but the districts and within them, the patrol service areas or PSAs should be organized according to volume. That is, how many calls, how many incidents, and to try to distribute that as evenly as possible. With obviously some other constraints, like you don't want a PSA that's low on crime to be super huge. I hope that answers the question. Lindsay?
A third-year DCPS teacher would like to know is there a hearing scheduled for the student loan relief bill for educators, and who is eligible for loan relief under this bill?
Question has to do with legislation to provide loan relief to students, to educators. No, a hearing has not been scheduled yet on that. The committee of the whole is looking at its hearing schedule for the next 3 months.
Eligible under that bill?
I don't, if the question is who's eligible, I don't know. And of course, however the bill's proposed, it could be that after a hearing, the bill is changed based on the testimony. Lindsay?
Councilmember White has introduced a crime bill that focuses on coordinated emergency response teams. That was also a topic at today's breakfast. How will that be extended to schools and between LEAs?
Oh, gosh, you need to speak louder because I can't repeat all that question. So Councilmember Robert White introduced a bill that I forget how it was characterized because it was different than the way he's coordinating emergency response teams. I don't really remember that as part of the bill. I thought there were other features in the bill. Staffing in the city administrator's office. The bill was just introduced, and I'll have to go through a hearing. If I remember correctly, it's been referred to the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. And
they're asking if the coordination will reach to schools and LEAs.
The question is whether the coordination will reach to schools and LEAs. I'm not sure how to answer that. As I recall, Councilmember White's bill deals with, among other things, staffing in certain agencies, not staffing in schools. But the purpose of this staffing is to provide better public safety, and that would include schools. I think I did not answer that question the way the questioner intended, so perhaps he or she can follow up.
Apparently Empower Ed has released a press release on ideal school ratings. Have you seen it? Is there a council response, and how committed are you to holistic measures?
Apparently Empower Ed has released a
ideal school
ratings. I've not seen that. We are planning on having a hearing later this fall or December, January on school achievement or academic achievement. And that might be a place where we look at this.
Have you taken a walk on 14th Street in Columbia Heights lately? There are many tables selling stolen goods, likely from nearby stores. They have been emboldened since you and Councilmember Mendo decided to open up street vending. Did you not think of these unintended consequences? And open up street vending to anyone without a permit.
The question has to do with street vending, and then if asking if I've gone up 14th Street around Columbia Heights and seen all the vending tables, which the questioner is sure are filled with stolen goods. Gosh, there's a lot in that question. And then whether that somehow Councilmember Nadeau and I are at fault because we opened up or made it easier for street vendors to vend because they don't have a license. I think a license is still required. We made it easier for street vendors, but I believe a license is still required. So the question's wrong on that. The police are supposed to have an eye on street vending to see if that's a way that stolen goods are being sold. I don't know that. I think that's conjecture, unfounded conjecture, that the Columbia Heights vendors are all selling stolen goods. I know that there is a problem with shoplifting, and particularly the CVS in Columbia Heights. But I don't think that those are the goods that are showing up on the tables on the street out there. And in any event, that is an MPD function that MPD is responsible for. There was more to that question.
That's pretty much it.
All right, what's the next question?
Educators are frustrated by the law requiring 16-hour dyslexia courses each year because the course doesn't offer tools and consumes precious time. How can we advocate for changes?
All right, this is the first time I'm hearing this. So the question is, educators are frustrated with the 16-hour training requirement for dyslexia that does not offer tools to the educators. This is the first time hearing that. And there will be a hearing this fall where teachers could come in and testify about this. The legislation the council adopted 3-4 years ago concerning dyslexia, and it was not just dyslexia, but other reading disorders, requires that a large number of educators get training so that they can recognize when a student might have a reading disorder, and then a fewer number of educators get more extensive training in how to work with students who have a reading disorder so that they can learn to read and achieve educationally. So I can't offhand, I can't speak specifically to this 16 hours, but it sounds like that's the training that's supposed to enable educators to recognize students who might have a reading disorder and to take some basic steps in response. But I haven't heard any other complaints. So when it's said that educators are frustrated, I only know of this one. Lindsay?
So few DC government employees are district residents. I've heard under 5%. Perhaps if they received a 0.5% increase in their pension per year of district residency, more employees would live in the city. I would be interested in your thoughts.
Question has to do with so many district government workers are not DC residents. And the questioner speculates it's around 5%. I think that's way too low. It depends on the agency, and all accepted service, EXCEPTED, accepted service, are required to be residents of the city. There are a few exceptions there, which I think have to be made specifically by the mayor or legislated by the council. Depends on the agency, but I don't believe there's any agency that's as low as 5% DC residents. I would say maybe a few are like like 35 to 45%. As being non-residents. The question went on to ask if I would consider a 1% increase in the pension. I don't know that there's any empirical evidence to suggest that that would change residency rates. We do have a number of provisions in the law that attempt to encourage residency. We have a residency preference, and we provide certain benefits to residents that we don't provide to non-residents. Like, I think there's supposed to be a housing subsidy available for teachers and police and fire if they're DC residents. And I think that's the best I can do in that answer.
Following up on the ratings question, OSSI is working on a school report card right now, and I'm curious if the council will weigh in on this.
The council may or may not weigh in. The OSSI is working on a school report card. That was the question, and whether the council would weigh in. My understanding is that OSSI is going to present that to the Board of Education, and that the Board of Education is the one under the law that has the authority to weigh in, as the questioner is asking. If it's controversial, then I expect that the council will step in and have a hearing. If it's not controversial, then probably the council won't step in. But we are monitoring what's going on, and the OSSI's work is not done.
Another OSSI question. We are well into the school year, and OSSI still has challenges with transportation. This has been going on for over 2 years and hasn't gotten better, and they have no plan for improvement. What is the plan to hold them accountable?
But the question has to do with OSSI transportation. OSSI transportation is for students who have an IEP, an individualized education plan, that requires that the city provide transportation. The questioner says that OSSI is still having huge problems. That wasn't the phrase. What was it? Continues to have.
It hasn't gotten better, and they have
Hasn't gotten better, and my impression was the question was that there are huge problems with the transportation and hasn't gotten better in 2 years.
They don't plan for improvement.
And they don't have a plan for improvement. That is so far from what the feedback we're getting. A year ago, meaning I think actually last January, OSSI made some changes in transportation, and the phones were ringing off the hook, and the computers were going crazy with emails from parents complaining. I don't think I've gotten a complaint in maybe a month. And I'm not saying there aren't some situations where OSSI transportation is screwing up, but it absolutely has changed from where it was last January. The number of complaints, the dramatic drop in complaints evidences that OSSI's gotten better at it. They've had a 10 or 15% increase in the number of students with IEPs calling for individual transportation. And I think it could be that that's being overprescribed. There are some students who clearly need it, but I have a colleague who actually has told me that her child has an IEP because of reading. I think it might be a reading disorder, and the child was offered transportation, even though the issue doesn't in any way affect the student's ability to get to school. That's just to illustrate that it may be that more students are being prescribed transportation than really need it. And that, of course, means that there's more of a burden on OSSI transportation. As I said, it went up, I think, at least 10% this year, the number of students. And they're having a problem hiring drivers. And they're pursuing a number of strategies, but they seem to have gotten their on-time rate much, much, much better. And missing students or missing pickups much, much, much less.
When will the social housing Green New Deal bill get a full council vote?
When will the social housing Green New Deal legislation get a council vote? That is actually not up to me. It's in either the Housing Committee or Transportation Committee, or maybe both. It has to go through the committee process and then it will come to the full council. I do want to warn that there are many bills that are very popular that have a significant fiscal impact, and everyone celebrates when the council adopts the bill. But if it doesn't get funded, it's not going to be effective. And the fact is that we cannot fund everything that people request, especially this coming year. We're looking at several demands like WMATA that are going to suck up any leftover money that we might have or any money that we could raise. Lindsay?
Is there a hearing set for Mr. Fruman's bills on ending restrictive land covenants in Ward 3? If not, when will it be set?
So a hearing set on Matt Fruman's 3 bills concerning land covenants, which restrict multifamily housing. Those bills were just introduced 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. There will be a hearing on them. It hasn't been set.
What can be done for safety of pedestrians on 9th and Aspen Streets in Ward 4?
What can be done for pedestrian safety at 9th and Aspen in Ward 4?
They've requested traffic calming and a 4-way stop, but nothing has been done, and the intersection is very dangerous.
They've requested traffic calming and stop signs, and nothing has happened. I can't speak to that specific intersection. There's a process that typically involves the ANC, and I know that DDOT is sometimes slow or not responsive to ANCs. ANCs are advisory, they're not the ones that make the decision, but still DDOT usually pays attention to the ANCs. I will say DDOT is without a director right now, a permanent director, and I don't know if that's having an effect here. Lindsay?
Got a bunch of questions about cannabis, about the ABC, the ABCA issued final rulemaking, and there are a couple of questions.
All right, I have some questions about cannabis and the ABCA board, which is Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Administration.
Why are cannabis retailers going to be allowed to be located closer than a liquor store to a school, daycare, etc.? It's 400 feet for alcohol, but 300 for cannabis.
Why is ABCA proposing that cannabis stores can be located 300 feet from a school when ABC stores have to be 400 feet, at least 400 feet from a school? I couldn't speak to that.
Okay.
But the questioner can always, if they're an ANC commissioner, they could have their commission adopt and send comments to ABCA on the proposed rule.
Edible cannabis comes in multiple forms, but ABCA removed all restrictions on product packaging without requiring some notice that it is a cannabis product and should not be consumed by minors.
I don't know what to say. The question has to do with ABCA is proposing that edibles that would be something you can eat that has cannabis in it, that they can be packaged without a label saying that there's cannabis in it. That would surprise me, but again, I didn't write the rules, I didn't promulgate the rules, I don't have oversight over ABCA. That would be the Committee on Economic Development, Business and Economic Development, chaired by Kenyon McDuffie. I don't know what ABCA's thinking was in terms of these regulations.
Okay, now another subject, is DC going to get a new stadium?
Is DC going to get a new stadium? Don't know. I apologize for this lighting, very weird. There are several factors involved. One of them is, what does the team want? The second is Maryland and Virginia presumably are competing to get the stadium. That is Maryland to keep it and Virginia to get it. And what are they offering in return? Which gets us back to point one, what does the team want? Another factor is that the Mayor Bowser, has indicated that she wants the football stadium to relocate to the district. Is she going to propose that the district fund some or all of this? In order to fund some or all of it, she's going to have to identify where the money is going to come from, especially when we have a $200 or $300 million WMATA shortfall. And when our revenues are, the revenue growth is less than what had been projected before. So the budget looks like it's going to be tighter, and don't know what the mayor's going to propose. My own view is that if the team wants to locate in the district, I could be okay with that, but I don't believe that this city should put money up for a stadium.
Is DC going to have to flip the bill for the metro shortfall? It doesn't seem fair.
Is DC going to have to is DC going to have to foot the bill for the WMATA funding shortfall? It doesn't seem fair. The district is engaged in discussions with counterparts in Maryland, Virginia about WMATA's funding problems. WMATA is facing what was initially reported as a $750 million shortfall or fiscal cliff beginning at the end of the current fiscal year. Very generally, broadly speaking, the district is not expected to foot the bill. It's expected to pick up about a third of the bill. I would argue that the district's share probably shouldn't be a third, but should be less. We have less population, and we are paying more than a third for other aspects of WMATA's operations. The representatives from all the jurisdictions in the region are meeting to discuss how we can solve this WMATA shortfall. And a decision probably will be a short-term strategy that will be in play for next spring when all the state legislatures, including the council, are adopting their annual budgets. And then I expect a year later, there'll be a long-term solution.
What is the district doing to help put grocery stores in wards 7 and 8? It seems like the council members from the wards aren't making any noise about it, and they keep closing the few that are left east of the river.
Can you repeat the question slowly? What is the council doing? What is the district doing to help
put grocery stores
in Ward 7 and 8?
They keep closing the few that are left.
They keep closing the few that are left, and it seems like the ward council members are doing nothing.
Right.
All right. The ward council members talk about grocery stores keeping the ones that are there and getting more. They talk about it all the time. So to say they're doing nothing would not be accurate. The few that are left, there are a few, and my understanding is that the one in Marshall Heights is going to close because that whole area is going to get redeveloped. This is at Benning in Minnesota, but that a new grocery store will come in. I'm not aware of any other grocery stores east of the river that are closing. I know there's been a lot of talk about the Giant on Alabama, but the Giant keeps saying that they have no plans to close. I do think that the mayor should make a special point of ensuring that there is additional police presence around there to reduce shoplifting and create a greater sense of security for customers. The district, the council funded, I'm going to say $10-20 million in the capital budget to assist with infrastructure for attracting grocery stores. I don't think that's done it. I think the district has also done everything it can to make clear that it wants a grocery store out East Capitol Street in the area generally around what used to be East Capitol dwellings. So there are different initiatives. I don't want to say that they're great. I think that the district could try some different things to attract grocery stores, like one-on-one conversations between the mayor and the CEOs of some of these grocery store chains, and looking at resources the district can put in to attract grocery stores, like whether that's more police presence or I don't know, to help with transportation or financing. I think there's some other strategies we can pursue, the government can pursue, but the government has not been AWOL on this.
How soon will the council be able to approve the police chief nomination?
How soon will the council be able to approve the police chief's nomination? We're probably not having a legislative meeting next week, so the next legislative meeting would be November 7th, and that's how soon we could do it to approve the new police chief.
Is it possible to establish the expectations that legislation not be voted on without a clear statement about how and by whom it is enforced? It seems like laws are created and then no one enforces them.
We're gonna have to repeat that.
Okay,
Is it possible
to establish the expectation.
to establish the expectation
That legislation not be voted on.
that legislation not be voted on
Without a clear statement about how and
So-
by whom it is enforced.
without a clear statement about how and by whom it is enforced?
Seems like laws are created and then no one enforces.
Seems like laws were created and then no one enforces them. Well, I'm not sure how to answer the question. This gets back to the separation of powers. So the council adopts policy and the mayor implements. The council cannot force the mayor to implement. This is just longstanding jurisprudence. We can pass a law that says that we can pass a law that's, I'm trying to think of something. Years ago, we put through a law that said that the city was going to acquire 4 houses. No, that the city was going to give title to 4 houses in historic Anacostia, 4 houses that the city owned that were falling apart, and give them to a nonprofit who was going to rehabilitate them. We passed the law and the mayor promptly did nothing about it. And we see a lot of that, but that's because we can't force the executive to do something. We can prohibit, but the opposite isn't as easy. Sometimes legislation is not well written, and so it's not clear what the enforcement authority is. Sometimes the enforcement authority gets caught up in the bureaucracy. I'm thinking of, for instance, illegal construction, where it seems like enforcement is really muddy. I was going to say as clear as mud, but I think really muddy the enforcement. That's a function of the executive, and some of us in the council try to write legislation more clearly, but as I said, that's usually not the problem. It is a bureaucracy or a lack of desire to follow through with what the council approves. Lindsay? Sounds like we're out of questions. It's 5:58. I'll stall for a minute. The executive is in the process of beginning the developing a budget for next fiscal year. So we just started this fiscal year 10 days ago. But already the agencies are being asked to look at their budgets with an eye toward what they need in fiscal year 25. We will get the budget in March, and a whole lot can happen between now and then, but the process is beginning. I have been especially concerned about the budget for schools, and that DCPS Central stop feeding itself, and that it get more resources to individual schools and their classrooms. So that's something we're going to be working on this fall, laying the groundwork for next year, and next year's budget, and I would add that the schools meaning TCPS and the charter, they're called LEAs. Those are the now why am I going to try to define what an LEA is? Basically, it's an organization under which are a number of schools. So DCPS is an LEA. KIP, which has a number of campuses, is an LEA. And generally, the LEAs are funded on a per pupil basis. That's the uniform per pupil funding formula. But the WTU teacher contract money was all paid outside of the UPSFF. So that's got to get worked into the UPSFF for next year. Meanwhile, I'm going to be focused on trying to make sure that money is not cut to individual schools. As I said earlier, I recognize that arguably the greatest concern among DC residents right now is public safety. And it's my view that the council has moderated from where it was a few years ago, so that the council is supportive of the MPD budget. It's really, in my mind, a question of whether MPD is really looking hard enough and thinking creatively about what other strategies it could pursue, and then tell us what resources MPD needs for that, and the council will probably fund it. I think we're kind of out of questions, and I'm not sure I want to keep talking. The next meetup is, when do we do these meetups, Lindsay? All of them. They're supposed to be like the first Monday. They're usually the second Monday of the month if it's virtual, or the second Saturday of the month if it's in person. I'm kind of hoping the next one will be in person, because to go back to that question about why we want people to come back to work and work in the office, I just think that personal interaction is far more productive. So I'm hopeful I will see you all in person. Until then, thank you all for participating, and